Great, thanks, Michael. It's great to be back here. I've done a few of these for SCORE so far. Generally, these presentations only take about 15 minutes or so in terms of what I'm going to present. So there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards if folks have questions. So like I mentioned, my name is Tom Kittredge of the Maine Technology Institute. And to start, I just wanted to share a little bit about who MTI is. So we are a nonprofit organization. We were actually founded by the state of Maine back in the late 90s. And our mission is to diversify and grow Maine's economy by encouraging, promoting, stimulating, and supporting innovation and its transformation into new products, services, and companies, and ultimately the creation of quality jobs for Maine people. So really what that means is MTI is looking to use innovation in Maine business as a means to achieve positive economic impact in the state of Maine. So our goal is really to provide resources, primarily funding, to businesses in the state of Maine with the hope that they can grow and create economic impact, ranging from creating good jobs to attracting additional investment into the state of Maine, growing revenues, and all those things that help kind of the Maine economy grow and become more resilient. So just a little bit about the history of MTI. So like I mentioned, we were founded in the late 90s by the legislature. We are not actually a state agency. We are a nonprofit, but we receive most of our funding from the state of Maine, and we interface with the legislature every year. As of 2022, so as of last year, we'd invested over $300 million in Maine organizations to support innovation in the state of Maine. So in terms of scope of MTI funding, and this is a common question we receive, MTI really is seeking to provide support at every stage of a business's growth. So right after you might come up with an idea, all the way to being a thriving business that's been functioning for years or decades. So from idea to research, development, commercialization, and sustainability. The amount of MTI funding ramps up the farther along you are on this continuum. So if you are kind of just post-idea stage, you're going to be eligible for smaller amounts of MTI funding than you would be if you are generating revenue, have a number of full-time employees, and can show that you're on a sustainable path of growth. And I'll touch on that a little more later in the presentation. So key requirements, and I'm going to dive into each of these 5 much deeper in a moment, but shared goals, and that really means shared goals of positively impacting the Maine's economy. Innovative and forward thinking, and that again goes back to that idea of innovation. Maine-based organizations, fairly self-explanatory, though I will kind of go a little bit more into the criteria we use for that. 7 targeted technology sectors. So MTI, when we were founded by the legislature, they tasked us with supporting 7 sectors within the Maine economy that were perceived as being key growth drivers of Maine's economy moving into the future. And I'll touch on what those 7 are. And then last, access to matching funds. So to that first one, shared goals. So again, this really means economic impact potential. So is your business set up to grow in a way that's going to create economic impact in the state of Maine? So again, we're looking at things like the creation or retention of quality jobs statewide, and emphasis on quality. We're looking for well-paying jobs that allow people to live to have a sustainable livelihood. Growth and acceleration of revenues, and attraction and leveraging of additional capital or other investments. The second category is innovative and forward thinking. So we use a tool we call the viral chart, which is developed by one of our partners called Village Capital. And it's a tool to look at how far along a business is in its growth. So there's 8 different stages of growth. The first kind of being linked to a business who maybe has an idea and has validated that idea, but doesn't even have a prototype, ranging to a thriving business who's at the top of its industry. And MTI uses this viral assessment to determine how far along in its growth a business might be. And if you were to contact MTI, we would work with you to determine your viral level, which would, like I said, then inform how much funding might be available. Maine-based organizations. Actually, sorry, I just want to go back one moment just to talk a little bit more about the idea of innovation. So innovation and economic impact are really the 2 key pillars of what MTI is looking to do. And when we think about innovation, we're looking to see ideas that are meaningfully differentiated from what's already out there in the market. So you should be able to speak to, if you look to apply for MTI funding, what is the competition? What are the alternatives already out there? And how is what you're doing differentiated from those alternatives? And what is your value proposition to your customers? And how is that again, kind of superior to what's already out there in the market. And that's something that SCORE has been really tremendous in working with a lot of our early stage companies to think about their value proposition and how they're differentiated from what's already out there. So Maine-based organizations, so we have a few criteria in this area. One is just that you have to be registered Maine business. And specifically, we're looking for a business to be registered with the state of Maine's Bureau of Corporations. And that's just something you can fill out online to become registered with them. The second is a presence in Maine. And we're looking for a meaningful, substantial presence. So generally, we mean headquartered in Maine. If not headquartered in Maine, then the bulk of the employees are in Maine. So it really should feel like a Maine-based organization rather than an organization from another part of the country who maybe has only a secondary or tertiary presence in the state of Maine. We do occasionally receive applications from companies that are intending to relocate to the state of Maine. In that case, we can start working with them on the application, but generally we wouldn't actually disperse any funding until the business can demonstrate that they are now headquartered in the state of Maine. So I mentioned that we were tasked by the legislature with 7 sectors that we're looking to support and grow. And those are biotechnology, composites and advanced materials, environmental technologies, forest products and agriculture, information technology, marine technology and aquaculture, and precision manufacturing. A couple things to note in this area. One is it's not uncommon for businesses to fall within more than one sector, and that's totally fine. We sometimes have companies that apply information technology, but they're also working in the manufacturing space. Or there's somebody's using composites to design a particular boat hull, and that also falls in marine technology and aquaculture. So that's totally fine. We also occasionally will have a business whose sector would not be considered one of these 7 technology sectors, but their innovation would fall within one of these sectors. So that's particularly common with information technology, where we might have a business whose primary sector would be considered food or something like that, but they're developing a platform. And because that platform falls within information technology, we're able to work with them. So that's just something important to note. And again, there's always the opportunity to speak to an MTI investment officer to get a sense of whether or not MTI would consider your business as falling within one of our sectors. So access to matching funds. So one of the key MTI requirements, and again, this is built into our statute with the state, is that we're required to have matching funds for any project that we support. So if a business comes to MTI, for example, and they have a project that's going to help move their innovation forward, and that project is going to cost, let's say, $100,000. MTI could hypothetically provide up to half of that, so $50,000. And again, that's assuming you're eligible for $50,000, which is based on the stage of your business and the economic impact potential. But let's say you are. So MTI could provide up to half of the funding for that project, $50,000. The other half would have to come from another source of funding. And we've seen that matching funds come from things like the revenue that the business is already generating, if it has revenue, from the founders themselves, putting in some funding, from outside investors, from a loan, from credit lines or credit cards, or even from other grant funding opportunities that exist. Particularly if a business is awarded a federal grant, for example, an SBIR, you're able to apply that as matching funds. The only time you can't apply something as matching funds if it's funding that's also from the state of Maine. So that comes most frequently, that's an issue when folks receive an investment from the Maine Venture Fund, which is also funded through the state of Maine. We have to be a little careful there because it's considered 2 sources of state of Maine funding, but that's fairly rare. And again, MTI investment officer would be happy to talk with you about that. The only other thing I want to mention about matching funds is there is an opportunity, particularly for smaller, earlier stage grants, to count part of your match as what we call sweat equity, which is basically the value of the unpaid labor of the founders. Generally, MTI's rule of thumb is that match shouldn't be more than 30 to 40% of the MTI request. So if you request 10,000 from MTI, you might be able to have part of the match, 3,000 to 4,000, be in the form of in-kind match, sweat equity, but MTI would still be looking to see 6,000 to 7,000 in cash match. And just a little bit more about sweat equity. So that's the idea that, for a lot of early stage businesses, their founders might be working unpaid. but dedicating substantial time to the project that they propose to MTI. So we want to acknowledge that if they were actually hiring someone to do that work, they'd be having to pay them. But because they're doing it themselves, we're able to count that as match. And again, generally, that's more applicable for earlier stage and smaller grants. So this just gives you a sense of kind of the ranges of MTI funding. So generally for businesses who are viral level 1, so again, that's a business who has an idea, who has done some validation of the idea, but doesn't necessarily even have a prototype, very early stage. They're eligible for up to $25,000 in MTI funding. And as you advance up this viral chart, hitting key thresholds like having an MVP or having a prototype, the next key threshold being generating revenue, being able to demonstrate you have sales, the amount of MTI funding that you might be eligible for goes upwards. Just to touch on the sorts of MTI funding that are available. So we have grant funding available. We also do loans, and occasionally we'll do equity investments. Royalty is actually a little outdated. We haven't been doing that the past few years. Generally, when a business comes to MTI for the first time, we work with them to explore grant funding. That's great for the business. There's no expectation of repayment. It doesn't dilute your ownership. But it's also a good way for MTI to kind of build a rapport with a business before moving on to other sorts of fundings. You might be thinking, why would I not just always apply for grant funding? And the reason is that MTI has a cumulative lifetime grant limit of $100,000 per business. So generally what happens is a business will work with MTI, often by receiving multiple grants. And then when they hit $100,000 in cumulative funding, that's when we'd start working with them to explore loans or equity investments if they're looking to continue growing and scaling with MTI support. So what's a good time to contact MTI? So, what's a good time to start where you might be eligible for MTI funding? So these are the things that generally an MTI investment officer is going to want to talk to you about if you come to MTI and inquire about funding. So you should be able to speak to the problem that you are addressing and point to supporting evidence. So ideally, that would be customer interviews or market research or different things to demonstrate that this is a problem in the market that's being unmet. The innovation and how it is differentiated from existing options. So having an understanding of the competitive landscape, who are the big players that are already out there, and how is what you're proposing differentiated from what's already exists. Customer discovery. So again, have you spoken to prospective customers? What sort of feedback have you gotten? Ideally, these prospective customers would not just be friends and family, because those people are more likely to kind of tell you what they think you want to hear. Ideally, these would be strangers or people who are not connected to you. That's more likely you're going to get really clear, strong feedback. Team with complementary skill sets. So MTI's strong preference is to provide funding to founding teams that have at least 2 people on them. With that said, we do occasionally found sole founders, but our preference there is to see that those founders have a really strong network of advisors, employees, mentors, and different people who can support them. So it's not just a sole founder working on their own. Competitive landscape and market opportunity. I already touched on competitive landscape, market opportunity, demonstrating that there is a real market and that there's an opportunity from that market for your business to grow and scale and create that economic impact that MTI is looking to see. And then the resources that you will need to move the innovation forward. And what that really means is, do you have a project in mind that you're seeking MTI support for, and that will help you move your innovation forward and in turn grow your business? So these are the 6 categories that MTI looks at when somebody submits an application to MTI. You'll see they're linked to the topics already discussed, but economic impact. So really, where do you see your business in a few years in terms of number of employees, in terms of revenue, in terms of capital raised, in terms of what sort of facilities you might have in the state of Maine, and what's the basis for that vision? So generally, MTI asks you to project 3 years out from now to kind of talk about where you hope and believe your business will be. And we also ask you to kind of provide some validation behind those various assumptions that are built into that projection. Obviously, with any projection, a lot can change, but MTI is looking for kind of realistic best hopes to get a sense of where the business can be in a few years. Team, again, we ask you to talk to not just the founders and the key employees, but also who are your mentors, your investors, your board of directors, whatever sort of support you have and whoever is involved in bringing the project to fruition. Innovation and value proposition. So what is your innovation? How is it differentiated from what's already out there? And how does it provide value to your customers? And again, that's an area we like to see a little bit of talk when it comes to competitive landscape, and also for you to speak to customer discovery. So who have you talked to and what sort of feedback have you received? Customer and market. So who's your target customer? What's the market opportunity? And what sort of plans do you have to go to that market to be able to capture that market and start developing a pipeline? Business model. So what is your revenue model? So, are you, if you're a platform, is it software as a service? Is it a premium model? There's a variety of different models that might exist out there for revenue. What are the expenses that you anticipate having, and how do you plan to make a profit? And also, what sort of investment might you need to attract to be able to grow and scale to the point where you're profitable? And then lastly, the scope of work and budget. So the scope of work is where MTI asks you to define what is your project. And then the budget is where we ask you to define what are the expenses associated with your budget or associated with your scope of work, and how do you plan to pay for these expenses? So that would be partially through MTI funding and partly through matching funds. So that's everything I have for the presentation. So I'd love to just take a little time for any Q&A and questions folks might have.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I can enable everybody's microphones. I'll actually just do that. We'll promote folks and can feel free to jump in if you've got a question, because there's not too many of us here, so I will do that.
Well, Tom, I'd just like to say that was a great presentation. Would it be possible to get a copy of it?
Oh, sure, Charlie. Yeah, absolutely. I think generally what SCORE does is I'll send the presentation to them, and then you'll distribute it to everybody at the meeting. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah, within the next 24 hours, you'll get a recording, because the Zoom has to process it and trim it down the very beginning and everything. But I'll send out the recording and a copy of the slides to everybody.
And if you don't mind, a follow-up question I have is, when you look at the targets for MTI, number 7 was precision manufacturing. Can you define what that means by precision manufacturing?
What I might do actually is I can just pull up the description on our website to make sure that I'm not misquoting. So just give me one. I'm going to stop sharing there, and then. So if you go on our website, in case anybody's curious to see a little bit more of a definition of our sectors, let me just share a screen here. You'll be able to see a little bit of a definition of each of our sectors. So precision manufacturing includes 2 distinct subsectors: metal products and electronics. Each has a small number of very large world-scale firms and a much larger number of smaller companies serving a variety of customers, primarily outside Maine. And you can see it goes into a little bit more detail here. But so for each of these sectors, if you have questions about exactly what we mean by that, you're welcome to go on the website. And again, if you're not sure, feel free to contact an MTI investment officer and we can discuss in greater depth.
Thank you.
I see Karen has a hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. So thinking about this from a, let's say an entity submits an application for 25,000, they're awarded the 25,000, and they want to come back and apply for additional funding for the same product, for the same project, but maybe a different component of it. Would they need to submit all of the details from, back to competitive advantage, value proposition, because those, you're already aware of what those are and the relationship that you have with them? So would they need to go into that much detail for a second application?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And part of the reason is just because there's a couple of reasons for that. So we do ask, if you're coming back to MTI for follow-on funding, the process will be very similar for each different MTI request. You are more than welcome to reuse all the content from your initial request that's still relevant. The 2 reasons we kind of ask you to go through the process again is, one is because on the back end, our review team is always changing, and it might be that the people who are reviewing your new application aren't the same people who reviewed the initial application. So it's helpful for them to see those materials. The other reason is that MTI, with each request, and as you move through MTI's different ranges, our due diligence gets a little more intense. Hopefully your business has developed since the initial MTI award, and you're able to include some additional information and updates as to how your business has grown. But also the nature of the questions we ask get a little more detailed. For example, on team, for a range 1, which is our earliest range of funding, we're not asking you to talk to the governance structure of your business. But if you're applying for a range 3 or range 4, we might be asking you to talk to if you have a board of directors and who's involved in that board. Same go with financials. So for range 1 and range 2, we don't collect financial information. So we're not asking you to provide a copy of your profit and loss statement or a balance sheet or projections. But for a range 3, we would be asking for that content. So also, I mean, part of it's just as the business grows, we're looking for, and as we ask for larger sums of MTI funding, we're looking for a little more information.
Great, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
It does.
But again, just to emphasize, you're more than welcome to you don't have to, change the wording of things that you use in your first application if they're still relevant in the second application. So you're welcome to kind of reuse information from initial applications if they're still relevant.
Thank you.
So you've got your hand raised, Katrina. Feel free to jump on in.
Hi, thank you. I just have a question. Sorry, one second. I just have a question for you guys about, it seems like a lot of your things you're looking at funding, I guess, are kind of materials or scalable solutions within industry. I work in the construction industry, and specifically the green sector and passive house building. And I am currently looking for funding sources for a number of different things, but primarily to scale the business. And also we're looking at changing ownership of the business a little bit. So I guess my question is, for somebody who's been working at a company for a long time, it's up and running in a highly functional way. And I think we hit a lot of the marks that you're describing, but we're looking at breaking into a new sector of the industry. Is there any overlap there with MTI?
I think definitely potentially. I mean, my recommendation would be to submit an intake request through our website. And I should have mentioned that. So for anybody who might be interested in kind of talking more with MTI, if you go on our website, you'll see a get started link, and that gives you an opportunity to basically request a meeting with an MTI investment officer. We've definitely done work with, provided funding to organizations who are in the green housing space. Passive houses, even we're working with an organization called Croft that is manufacturing panels made of straw, for example. We've also worked with, a variety of companies. Really, I think what an investment officer would want to understand is, what is the innovation? What are you doing that's different from what's already out there on the market? And again, the economic impact potential. But from a sector standpoint, I suspect that, you'd be able to fit within a manufacturing sector, for example. But again, my recommendation would be to kind of reach out to an MTI investment officer to kind of go into a little greater depth.
Okay, thank you.
And I did just throw the direct link to the Get Started page on MTI's website into the chat if anyone wants to go and check that out. All right, any more questions from folks before we wrap things up here? Oh, yes,
sorry. And I'm going to put my my email in the chat as well. If folks want to just shoot me an email, and happy to kind of answer questions offline as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, Rachel, go ahead and let us know what you got in your mind. If you'd like, you are still muted as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing this information. It's super helpful. I think I've really determined that I'm not eligible for an MTI grant, but somebody has suggested I raise a question about, is it MERC, the Maine Entrepreneur Resource Corps program, and about leveraging funds through that to access MTI funds. Have I got that right?
Well, I can speak a little to MERC, and I suspect, yeah, so MERC is a program that we're running on behalf of the state of Maine, and specifically the domestic trade program. And it's separate. So that's a great question, Rachel. And Merck is not part of this presentation, but I would encourage folks to check it out. So everything I described in terms of criteria is relevant to what MTI calls our core funding, and that's the bulk of what we administer. Occasionally, we have other pools of funding available. One is with the American Rescue Plan Act. For a while, we were administering funds on behalf of the state of Maine related to different programs. So people might have heard of the Prime Fund or the Forest Recovery Act. So those were separate pools of funds that MTI administered on behalf of the state. They were kind of one-time things. Most of those are now closed out, though we are administering one program called the Electric Grid Upgrade Plan for companies who are looking to upgrade their electric grid. Merck is another program that we're administering, and that's a little more ongoing, but it's kind of separate from MTI's core funding. And the purpose of Merck is to provide companies who might have fairly short-term consulting needs, so needing to hire a consultant in some key areas in a way that would allow them to grow their domestic sales. So going back to that domestic trade program, access to consultants. I believe that the maximum you can tap into from MTI is 15,000 over a 2-year period. But let's say you need to hire a consultant who's going to assist you with a marketing plan to grow your domestic sales. You could come to MTI's Merck program, and MTI could hypothetically put up to half of the funding in to fund that consultant. And another resource we have is MTI keeps a roster of consultants who are approved to participate in this program. So if you're looking for advice on a consultant to hire for this program, we can advise you. If you've already found a consultant, we can generally also add that consultant to our database and make them eligible. So it's a really good tool specifically for hiring consultants. And again, specifically, if you can demonstrate that hiring that consultant allows you to grow domestic sales in the country. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. And I'll definitely check that out. What about, does put it and apply funds to installing systems into your own business to help with your own productivity and grow your business? So if you have to install specific project management tools and things like that.
It's specifically for consulting assistance. I mean, if you were hiring a consultant to assist you with that, then that the work you're doing with the consultant might be eligible. And I should say, in terms of growing domestic sales, the linkage doesn't have to be incredibly clear. So if you're able to show that project management is going to allow you, enhancing your project management system is going to allow you to grow sales, then that would likely be eligible. But it would need to be for consulting assistance. That is key. One other thing I should mention, so innovation is something I've touched a lot on in this presentation in terms of the business. For Merck, innovation is not a requirement. So, often businesses will not be eligible for MTI funding because they're not able to meet that innovation requirement. But for Merck, that's not the case. So it can be a really great resource if folks are looking for consulting assistance.
That's great. Thank you.
And again, you can definitely find more website information about that on MTI's website. And MTI is a specific Merck coordinator, Emily Braley. And if you go to that Get Started page to request to talk to an MTI representative, you can specifically request to talk to her about the Merck program.
Okay, Emily Braley, did you say?
Emily Braley, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So you got another one for us, Charlie?
Yeah, 2 things, if you don't mind. The lady that inquired, and she said she's in the construction industry. If you don't mind, I'd like to get her contact information. And then second is, Tom, would it be better we had a sidebar on, because one of the things I made notes on is grants, loans, equity. Is that something that we could have a sidebar on, or would you rather cover it now?
Well, Charlie, you and I can definitely have a sidebar. But I mean, I can speak a little more in depth to that. So with something I should emphasize about loans and equity is those tend to be, I would say 99% of the time, for businesses that have already maxed out all of their eligible MTI grant funding, and B, fall within our viral level 3 or viral level 4 categories. So range 3 or range 4. So those are businesses that are already generating revenue. And for those, they have to be approved by MTI's investment committee. And what the investment committee is looking to see is the likelihood of repayment on an MTI loan, or the likelihood of a successful exit if it's an equity investment. So again, at that point, MTI is looking to see kind of sustainable cash flows, because that gives the support that we're going to be getting repayment. And the reason MTI has loans and equity is really that any money we get back from these investments is money that we can then put out again into the ecosystem. So that's why, some of our funding isn't in the form of grants, because we're looking to take money, put it out in the ecosystem, and then hopefully when a business is successful and able to repay us, we get it back and then we can put it out into the ecosystem again. But Charlie, I'm happy to talk to you more. I know you have my contact info, so happy to discuss in greater depth.
Thank you. If there's nobody else has questions, can I just have one last follow-up question on this electric grid? Is the intent behind that to keep people behind the meter?
Yeah, you're referring to the electric grid upgrade program?
Yes.
I'm going to be very candid, which is it's not really totally my area of expertise. It's a fairly new program, and some other folks are administering it. I'm going to post the link to the program in the chat. And then, if folks have more questions on it, I can try to send up an update. But I think the idea is to, allow businesses who need to, who aren't receiving enough power to their location to get some funding to kind of improve their local grid, I guess is the short answer. But I can do some more research into that one for you, Charlie, and happy to discuss more.
Thank you, Tom. Great presentation.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, final last call for any more questions from folks. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. As I said, I'll be sending out a copy of the slides and the recording as well within the next 24 hours. You'll also receive kind of a brief survey from us about the event. We'd love it if you fill that out, obviously optional. And just as a quick reminder, SCORE Maine offers free, confidential, and one-on-one mentoring, whether you're starting or growing your business. You can request a meeting with a mentor by visiting score.org, clicking that Find a Mentor button, and then filling out a short form. We are a nonprofit partner of the SBA with 240 chapters around the country and 3 in Maine. And we've helped over 11 million people since 1964, and we'd love if you were one of them. Thanks again to Tom and MTI and everybody for joining us today. Take care, folks.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Justin. Take care.